Hi, I'm Stephen Poole, Executive Director of UEA, and we're really excited about our partnership with Raise Your Hand Texas. And with me today is several of my friends who are regional advocacy directors for Raise Your Hand Texas. We have Missy Bender, Lisa Hoover, Kaylin Smith, and Matthew Hall here today to talk about the ins and outs of advocacy with the Texas legislature. So anyone want to say a couple of words? Hello to our members of UEA?
Well, I'll start off, Stephen, and thank you very much for this opportunity. We're so delighted to connect with your members and work together on our advocacy journey. We're here to be resources, and we're just so grateful that you're giving us that opportunity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So, Kaylin, I have a question for you. This year has kind of been unprecedented for teachers, and they have such a load to carry. Why should educators just take on that one more thing and learn to be effective education advocates?
Yeah, I want to first start off by acknowledging the load that the educators had this year. And we asked them to have a tremendous lift. A lot of them went from brick and mortar education to now teaching virtually or a hybrid model. And I would say that that is the main reason why we need them to advocate on behalf of their profession. See, only our educators and our teachers in the classroom know the success stories going on right now, or the challenges, or the resources they need, or the curriculum that they need. Only our educators can really be that voice because they are with our students on a daily basis. And so what I've learned is our elected officials are going to have to make decisions about testing, accountability, school funding, curriculum. These decisions have to be made. But in order to make sure that they are the decisions that are best for our classroom, we have to get the voice of the teacher because only the teacher knows what's best for their classroom.
Jolisa, what are the things teachers uniquely know and can share with legislators and their offices to help them understand education and these educators are facing?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm a former teacher, and I think it's important for teachers to remember that, first of all, you are an expert in how policy impacts your classroom. No one else can tell a legislator exactly what it means for a class size to change, or what it means to have a certain number of kids who arrive to your class hungry, or even what it means to have a certain number of kids who are disconnected from technology at home. You're the expert in that, which makes you uniquely qualified. Now, most of us have been through school. A lot of us have been through public school, but they haven't been a teacher. And so first, it's important to remember that you're the expert in this area. You're also really good at teaching. I mean, that's why you have this job. So you have the chance to take something that's really complex and explain it in an understandable way. Having time when you think about the skills you have the perfect skills to be an advocate because you can explain the complex things. You also have stories. We know that we like to think that we make decisions based on data, but most of us make decisions based on the stories, especially the stories that stick with us, or those what you can call tacky stories. So we have the stories that can illustrate that data that comes across a lawmaker's desk, and that story may stick with them. And we have the ability to tell it in an ethical way, protecting privacy, protecting our students, but we are the keepers of the stories. And we also are the people that can encourage other people to tell their stories. And then finally, we have access to people. I don't know about you, but as a teacher, I felt like my phone was just a collection of never-ending group text. And so we have a big connection to not only the parents in our classroom, but we also have all the teachers that we work with. The people who care about education are usually somewhere in our phones. Not only that, if you're a small town teacher, you may have taught everyone in town. So you have connections. So all of those things make you very uniquely qualified to be an education advocate.
Jolisa, my mother was a school secretary at the small school district where I grew up in. She knew everyone and I couldn't get away with anything. So you're exactly right about those small town connections. being around teachers and hearing their stories right now, especially teaching a lot of them teaching both virtually and in person, they just don't have time. And what little time they do have is very precious. So how do those teachers and educators, Missy, use time, their limited time wisely to get their point across to legislators?
Well, that's also a great question. On the one hand, as teachers, you have limited time, which we've certainly talked about. On the other hand, legislators or their staff members also have limited time. I'm going to address both sides of that coin. We've heard Kaylin and Jolisa both speak about why teachers would want to take on anything else, especially right now. You're busy as full-time educators, and now we're asking you to also learn how to become an effective advocate. So, you know, my colleagues have mentioned this, I'll mention it again. Very few legislators are expert educators. There are a few that might be former superintendents who fall into that category, but by and large, that's really not the norm. But they're still making decisions that affect you. So the other thing I want you to know is that they expect their constituents to contact them and voice their opinions about legislation. They're not always just going to, you know, throw a lifeline out there and, you know, reach out to you because they don't know you yet. So it's important because it affects you, it affects children, it affects really the lifeblood of our state. If you don't express your opinion, somebody else will. And you may not like what they're saying. So you can choose to speak up. I personally believe that legislators actually enjoy hearing from you very much. And listening to, as Jolisa said, the stories that you can share with them that help to support your point of view. I was a longtime school board member and spent a lot of time at the Capitol. They would listen to me. I had a relationship with them, but honestly, they want to hear from you. They want to hear from the people on the front line. They want to hear from the parents, the students, and such. So we're going to tell you how to start on that path, and we're going to help you. Now, we've talked about teachers being very busy and why should you spend your precious time doing this. I know it won't resonate with everybody, but it might resonate with some of you. Once you've decided to take this important step that you want to advocate, now you're ready to move to the next step, which is being effective with the time that you get with the legislator and or staff member. So I've outlined some steps that I'm going to take you through to help you use this time wisely to have the most effective outcome. Number one, first, ask yourself, what is my desired outcome? In other words, what does success look like for you at the end of the meeting? I want you to walk away and feel like that was successful. So you need to define what success looks like before you do anything. Do you want them to know something about the profession, to give them insight into the life of an educator, because there aren't a lot of experts there? Or do you want to ask them to support a specific piece of legislation that you like or don't like? It could be about measuring student growth rather than single day measures. Maybe you want them to support teacher pay raises. These are just a few examples. If you don't know where to start on that front, look at your school district's legislative agenda and look at UEA's legislative agenda. Those things might give you something to start your thinking process. Now that you have your desired outcome in mind, then we're going to know how to help you prepare for an effective meeting. So let's move to the next step. Do you want anyone else to attend with you? If so, keep it relatively small and work together on the preparations because it's great to have a team to support one another, and it adds a great color to the commentary that you have in these meetings. It's great to hear all of the stories from lots of different people because they're different. So that variety is very, very useful, and it can boost your confidence too. Next, think about no more than 3 things that you want to talk about in this meeting. It doesn't have to be a total of 3, but don't go more than 3 because that's just too much. And cover the most important item first, just in case you run out of time. Now, if you have more than one point, you're going to prioritize what those points are because, we're talking about the legislator not having much time. You're going to state your point and back it up with, as you've heard us say, a story and some data. I'm going to give you an example here. It's just made up numbers, but just to help you think it through. The increasing cost of healthcare for teachers through active care exceeds any annual increase that we receive. For example, last year in my district, teachers received a 2% pay increase, but the increase in the active care rate with no change in selections from me for my family took up all of that increase plus another $200. In addition, we're meeting a high deductible of about $4,000 a year. And now we have to eliminate the dance class that my daughter was taking just so that we can cover the increase in this cost. That's just an example I made up to give you something to think about when you're considering your examples. You want to make a handout if you possibly can with the key information from your messaging and leave it with the legislator or staff member if you're there in person. Bring extra copies if you're in a meeting in person. If you're meeting online, then you're going to send this attachment when you follow up with a thank you. Next, you want to make your ask. So again, think back to your original desired outcome. Did you want to make a specific request about legislation? Or did you just want to help inform the legislator about the work of teachers? Let's say that you want to develop a relationship with this legislator and become a trusted contact for them. In this case, your ask could be inviting them into your classroom, in person or virtually, to say, now that you know a little bit about what it's like as a teacher, come follow me for a day or for an hour so that I can show you more. Lastly, once you've finished your meeting, you're going to follow up with an email to the legislator or staffer with whom you met, thank them, and attach any information that you had created. And maybe there's some follow-up information that came up in your meeting that you wanted to supply. And restate your ask. You're looking for the next opportunity to engage rather than just having one meeting and being done.
Right. Jolisa, as a former teacher and advocate, can you add more a little bit to what Missy's saying, how to best utilize your time, either with a staff person or a legislator themselves?
I think Missy did such a beautiful job of it, and she went through it step by step. But I'd like to add just a little bit about, now you've heard those step by steps, and maybe you're rethinking, going, I don't have time. And I want to emphasize that time management truism, that we don't want to let the urgent crowd out the important. And everything in teaching is urgent, but it is important that they hear our voices. And so as a teacher, for me, what I would remind myself is there will be decisions made. They might as well be informed ones. And so I left some time on that very crowded plate to do all those steps that Missy described, so that I would feel that the people who represented me were well informed about a teacher point of view. And I think if you follow those steps that Missy mentioned, you're going to have a very well prepared meeting. I think it's also important to celebrate small successes. So if you have that meeting and it goes perfectly, celebrate it. If it doesn't go exactly perfectly, know that you've at least started and put your foot in the door. If you don't have or the time, or maybe you don't feel like you have the bravery to request a meeting, celebrate the fact that you contacted them through email or a phone call. It's important that we are participating. And I know that I have heard lawmakers say the voice that's missing the most is the teacher voice.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, kind of talk about the nuts and bolts of contacting elected officials. And Matthew, your expertise here and your experience being a staffer for a legislator could be useful. So if a teacher or educator calls or emails, who should they expect they're going to communicate with? What are staff dynamics, and how does a staff work for our elected officials?
Absolutely, Stephen. And I like to start off whenever discussing this topic with an interesting data point, and just to show you, one, just how human this institution is. It's not really monolithic, and in many ways, it's quite small when you break down to legislative offices. A state representative's constituency is more than twice the size of that of a British member of parliament. And unless they're a committee chair, they only have 2 to 3 full-time employees. That sometimes increases during the legislative session with session-only hires or interns, but you're talking about a very, very large constituency that now post-census is going to be in excess of 200,000 individuals with a 2 to 3 person staff that has to manage thousands of different policy topics, as well as constituent services with helping constituents with everything from applying for unemployment insurance to helping them apply for Medicaid and other state and navigating state agencies. And I say that to bring up that this is kind of a kindred spirit in this very lean team, very overwhelmed and looking for partners. And members really rely on their staff. You know, a lot of folks, when they're advocating in the state legislature for the first time, sometimes think it's like Congress, where it's a full-time legislature and you have fully salaried members of Congress. Our legislators meet, at least to make law, for only 140 days every other year. Of course, they're doing legislative work during the interim. What that means is that they all have to have a day job for gainful employment. So they really rely both on their team, their staff, and community partners to help them be prepared in order to make law. When you reach out to an office to schedule a meeting or to make a meeting request, chances are you're going to run into one of those 2 to 3 full-time employees. They often have the 3 most common legislative titles. If you call the district office, you might receive the district director. This individual is usually the guarantor of a lot of local relationships for that member, and they manage the district office. Sometimes, depending on the dynamics of that office, they may go with the member to session. You can also, if someone picks up the call, be talking directly to their chief of staff. This individual is their right hand, the immediate senior staffer. They manage all the staff, and particularly the expanded staff during legislative session. Or you may talk with their legislative director. This is their staffer who is their point person on public policy and also is largely a manager of a lot of their community relationships, particularly for local legislation they'll be filing. And so what you have in this moment is a very small office with a very big constituency, a very lean team, and they're going to be looking, as Jaleesa and Caitlin really brought up, they're going to be looking for folks who have expertise in various fields, particularly public education, as it's such an enormous part of the state budget. It and healthcare expenses are the 2 largest pots of money in general revenue, ongoing expenses. And they're going to be very interested in developing really strong relationships.
Jaleesa, when people call it, sometimes they expect when they call Austin for their elected officials, sometimes they expect they're going to talk directly to the state senator or their state rep, and kind of some way feel a little slighted or disappointed that they're only speaking with the chief of staff. Tell us how important these folks are to our elected officials and how important it is. Very similar into a school setting. You want the office staff on your side. Is it the same way in a legislative office?
It really is. And I would say not just legislative office, but any decision maker. That just a truism is to assume anyone in the room has the power to make the decision. That person is in the room for the reason. That person's answering the phone for a reason. And so don't be disappointed you got a staff member. This staff member may be the best person to talk to because they're the keeper of the file on education. I think sometimes there's some hesitancy to reach out. Like you said, I think there's the flip of that. Some people are disappointed they didn't meet with the representative. Some people are intimidated that if they call, that's who's going to answer. So I think it's kind of reassuring for some people to know that if you give the office a call, you're going to talk to someone that works for the representative or senator. But consider that person an important partner in your work. They may have the most influence in that office when it comes to education. So always go in with a sense of wanting to partner, like Matthew mentioned. I think in the age of internet, it's such a good idea to research the people. And then another question I like to ask if I'm meeting with someone is, do you have a connection to education? in the getting to know you section, if they are a former teacher, married to a teacher, they may have some insight. If they say, well, I had a great career as a student, then you have it, you know, you need to modify what you're going to share. So it never hurts to do a little bit of that probing or pre-assessment, as we would do in school, and find out what they already know and what their connections are. Some of that we can do online, and some of it we may need to do when we're talking with them.
So Kaylin and Matthew, this next set of questions are for both of you. What are the staff looking for when you're contacting them, and how can you, what do they find helpful in preparing and supporting their boss, the elected officials?
Sure. Sure. I'm happy to kick off. And I really like the dynamics of that question because it really hits home to what advocacy is. Advocacy really, it isn't adversarial, it's relational. All of the external grassroots mobilizing that for many folks, that's their first introduction to advocacy work, as well as those direct conversations with policymakers and their team, all lead towards the goal of building a relationship. And that's what staff are going to be looking for their member. We're talking about individuals with very limited bandwidth. They're dealing with so many competing interests for their time, from, especially this year, for concerns from numerous industries, from folks concerned about transportation, healthcare, public education, higher education, among veterans issues, that they're going to be looking for folks that can be their kitchen cabinet. It's usually is a really good way to describe it. Local community partners, that legislative director, that chief of staff, that lawmaker can lean on and for advice and counsel in a specific moment, particularly for how bills will affect a school district locally, a classroom locally, what the local impact will be, since so much of what happens on the House or Senate floor is regional. And there's only limited time to be able to figure out, what's the exact effect that this particular bill will have on my particular school districts. And you want to get to a point where perhaps you're the person that gets that staff call or that staff check-in. And to that end, there were a lot of staff are looking for, it was brought up very, really pointedly, stories. Data points are useful in crafting policy, but gaining support for a legislation or support for a vote, or really to understand why public education matters, stories matter. Living experience matters. Being able to rely on someone to provide, to be that storyteller and explain, like, public education matters so much in my constituency, and I have these following educators who can attest to that. That really matters. So anyone that can really help with that bandwidth issue that staff are always having to navigate and move through, and that's willing to be someone that can serve as counsel and then also be willing to share a story, is so helpful.
I'll just add on a little to what Matt said. And I think also it's helpful to kind of build a coalition. And so don't feel like you have to go into a meeting or a setting by yourself. A lot of staffers want to hear a collective voice. And so if you have a group of teachers, your grade level, some friends, teachers, parents, community members that are all affected by what you're advocating either for or against, come together and use your collective voice. And then the last piece is always leave them with something. And so it could be, here's some information, or we'd love for you to visit my classroom, or here's a one-pager on how this will affect my school or my district. And so you really want to leave them with something, because as Matt eloquently stated, it's a lean staff machine. They have a lot of constituents and only a few number of staffers. And so they can meet with 7, 8 people in one day, or have 7 or 8 meetings in one day. And so always leave them with something so that they can come back and view it.
So Missy, how does someone get started? What are the resources available to them, and where do they begin?
Well, the good news is, if you're watching this webinar, you've taken the first step. So you're already on the path. That's great news. And I'm just going to mention 3 more things that you can also do. The first one is, if you haven't already watched the Advocacy 101 video that UEA sent out last week, it's about 10 minutes or so. Take a minute to watch that to get a broader perspective on advocacy. Number 2, also super easy, go to our website at raiseyourhandtexas.org/advocacy, and you have the opportunity to sign up for 3 things, all at the same time. One of them, you'll get our e-newsletter. We send that out all the time. It just helps to keep you informed about all kinds of things. And it's a very supportive mechanism because we celebrate teaching all of the time. Number 2 on that list is sign up for our legislative text alerts. We reach out a couple of times during session and give you a chance to take about 30 seconds to weigh in on an important topic during session. Super easy. And number 3, connecting with the advocacy events in your community. So all of us that are on this call, there are 4 of us here. There are 13 of us in total across Texas. And we do a variety of different things. We do candidate events. We do listening circles. We do a lot of different things. So this would help you to get connected with those activities that we're always planning. Now, the last one is, after you've signed up for all of that, then you can contact one of us. We're going to provide the contact information for us. And if you're, we'd ask you to maybe get a few friends together, reach out to us, and we'll guide you through the process. We can connect you with legislators. We can help you identify what is that topic that's important to you that you want to advocate on. Jolisa, Kaylin, and Matthew are all former teachers, and Matthew's a staffer, and then I was a school board member. Plus we have principals, we have other staffers, we have people with lots of experiences that can help us help you. So we're not just limited to our resources, and we have policy experts. We have all kinds of tools that we can bring to you. We'll guide you through the process. We can help you make connections with the legislators, have a productive meeting, follow up on that meeting, and before you know it, you're an expert because you've done it. And once you've done it, now you can inspire other people in your networks to do the same thing, and you can guide them the same way. So there are some activities that you can do that are not time consuming and very simple, and others are more sophisticated. These categories, the legislative advocacy is more on the sophisticated side. Sometimes it can feel a little nervous. You can feel a little nervous sometimes about that, but we'll hold your hand and help you through it.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and helping educate our members and others on how to be effective advocates for themselves and their profession down in Austin, whether it's in person, phone call, or email. I encourage everyone who's watching this to share their thoughts and concerns with our elected officials. They welcome it. And the tips and tools that Raise Your Hand Texas has provided us today, and their really informational newsletters and websites are very important. But I want to thank each of you because I see you around in the communities left and right. It's the communities you live and work in, whether it's Dallas County, Denton, Collin County, Greater Tarrant County, or Central Texas. Y'all's work is very important and certainly doesn't go unnoticed by me and others. So thank you very much.